Africa, a continent teeming with life and rich in resources, bears the deep scars of conflict. From the heart of the Congo Basin to the arid plains of the Sahel, the battle for control over resources has torn communities apart. This is not a war fought solely on battlefields, but one that permeates the very fabric of society, leaving behind a legacy of mistrust, displacement, and despair. The pursuit of diamonds, gold, oil, and even land has become a curse, fueling violence and instability across the continent. These conflicts are often portrayed as simple struggles over resources, but the reality is far more complex. While the desire to control valuable resources undoubtedly plays a role, it is often intertwined with deeper issues such as ethnic tensions, political power struggles, and historical grievances. These factors create a toxic mix that can ignite violence with the slightest spark. The Democratic Republic of Congo, a nation blessed with vast mineral wealth, stands as a stark example of the devastating consequences of resource-driven conflict. For decades, armed groups have vied for control of the country's mines, turning the DRC into a battleground for profit and power. The human cost of this conflict has been immense, with millions displaced and countless lives lost. The echoes of conflict reverberate far beyond the borders of individual nations. The flow of refugees fleeing violence in one country can strain resources and exacerbate tensions in neighboring states. The illicit trade in conflict minerals provides funding for armed groups, perpetuating a cycle of violence that knows no boundaries. This is not just an African problem. It is a global challenge that demands a united response. To understand the present, we must first delve into the past. The seeds of many of Africa's current conflicts were sown during the colonial era. European powers, driven by greed and a sense of superiority, carved up the continent with little regard for existing ethnic boundaries or traditional systems of governance. This arbitrary division sowed the seeds of future conflicts by pitting ethnic groups against each other in a competition for land, resources, and power. The legacy of colonialism continues to cast a long shadow over Africa. The artificial borders drawn by colonial powers remain in place, often encompassing diverse ethnic groups with competing claims to land and resources. The systems of governance imposed by colonial rulers often favored certain groups over others, creating resentment and inequality that persists to this day. These historical grievances serve as a potent fuel for conflict, ready to be ignited by opportunistic leaders or economic hardship. In southern Tanzania, historical grievances stemming from German colonial rule continue to fuel resource conflicts. The forced displacement of indigenous communities to make way for German plantations created lasting resentment and a sense of injustice that resonates to this day. These historical wounds continue to fester, making it difficult to resolve current disputes over land and resources. The wounds of the past run deep, and their impact on the present cannot be overstated. Addressing these historical grievances is not about dwelling on past injustices, but about acknowledging their lasting impact and working to create a more just and equitable future. Reconciliation and healing are essential prerequisites for lasting peace and stability in Africa. Africa's abundant natural resources, often hailed as a blessing, have too often become a curse, fueling conflict and instability. The pursuit of diamonds, gold, oil, and other valuable resources has become a double-edged sword, bringing wealth to some while driving others deeper into poverty and conflict. The scramble for control over these resources has exacerbated existing tensions, leading to violence, corruption, and a breakdown of law and order. The insatiable appetite of the global market for Africa's resources plays a significant role in perpetuating this cycle of conflict. International corporations, driven by profit, often turn a blind eye to the human cost of their operations, extracting resources without regard for the environment or the well-being of local communities. This exploitative relationship leaves behind a legacy of environmental degradation, social unrest, and economic inequality. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, the pursuit of coltan, a key component in electronic devices, has fueled a brutal conflict that has claimed millions of lives. Armed groups, both domestic and foreign, have seized control of mines, using forced labor and violence to extract profits from the earth. The Congolese people have paid a heavy price for this global demand, their lives upended and their future uncertain. Breaking this cycle of exploitation requires a fundamental shift in the way we view and interact with Africa's resources. Sustainable development, equitable benefit sharing and respect for local communities must be at the forefront of any efforts to harness Africa's natural wealth. Only then can we hope to transform these resources from a source of conflict into a catalyst for peace and prosperity. While the roots of Africa's conflicts often lie within its own borders, external actors have played a significant role in exacerbating these conflicts for their own strategic and economic interests. Foreign powers, driven by a thirst for resources, strategic advantage or ideological influence, have often intervened in African conflicts, providing arms, funding and political support to favored factions. This interference has often served to prolong conflicts, deepen divisions and undermine efforts at peace building. The Cold War cast a long shadow over Africa as the United States and the Soviet Union vied for influence on the continent, often supporting proxy wars and propping up authoritarian regimes. While the Cold War may be over, the competition for influence in Africa continues, with new actors such as China, Russia and the Gulf states vying for a foothold on the continent. In Sudan, external interference has played a central role in fueling the ongoing conflict. The involvement of neighboring countries, each with its own strategic interests and alliances, has complicated efforts to find a peaceful resolution. The flow of arms and funding from external actors has served to prolong the fighting, exacerbating the humanitarian crisis and undermining regional stability. Addressing the issue of external interference requires a concerted effort by the international community to prioritize African-led solutions to African problems. This means respecting the sovereignty of African nations and refraining from actions that could exacerbate existing conflicts or undermine peace-building efforts. It also means holding accountable those who profit from conflict and instability in Africa, regardless of their nationality or motives. Section 5. The price of chaos, vulnerable populations caught in the crossfire. In the chaos of conflict, it is always the most vulnerable who suffer the most. Civilians, often caught in the crossfire between warring parties, bear the brunt of the violence. Millions have been displaced from their homes, forced to flee for their lives and seek refuge in overcrowded camps where disease and hunger are constant threats. The fabric of society is torn apart as schools are destroyed, hospitals are overwhelmed, and the rule of law is replaced by the law of the gun. Women and girls are particularly vulnerable in conflict situations, facing an increased risk of sexual violence, exploitation, and trafficking. The breakdown of traditional social structures and the proliferation of small arms create an environment of impunity where perpetrators of such crimes often act with little fear of consequences. The psychological scars of conflict can last for generations, leaving communities traumatized and struggling to rebuild their lives. The elderly and people with disabilities are also disproportionately affected by conflict. They may lack the mobility to flee violence, leaving them trapped in conflict zones with limited access to food, water, or medical care. Their voices are often marginalized in conflict situations, their needs overlooked in the rush to address more immediate humanitarian crises. Protecting vulnerable populations in conflict zones is not only a moral imperative, but also a critical component of any effort to build lasting peace. Providing humanitarian assistance, ensuring access to essential services, and creating safe spaces for dialogue and reconciliation are essential steps towards healing the wounds of conflict and creating a more just and equitable future for all. Section 6. Children of war, a lost generation robbed of innocence. Perhaps the most tragic victims of conflict are the children. They are the innocent bystanders, robbed of their childhood, their education, and their future. Forced to witness unspeakable acts of violence, many bear the psychological scars of conflict long after the guns have fallen silent. The loss of parents, siblings, and friends leaves deep wounds, creating a generation haunted by grief and trauma. In many conflict zones, children are not just victims but are also recruited as soldiers, forced to become instruments of violence. They are often abducted, coerced, or manipulated into joining armed groups, where they are subjected to horrific abuse and indoctrinated into a culture of violence. The use of child soldiers is a grave violation of international law and a stain on the conscience of humanity. Even those children who escape direct involvement in armed conflict are often denied their right to education. Schools are destroyed, teachers flee, and the pursuit of knowledge is replaced by the struggle for survival. This loss of education has a devastating impact on the future of these children, robbing them of the opportunity to reach their full potential and contribute to the development of their communities. Protecting children from the scourge of war must be a top priority for the international community. This means working to prevent the recruitment and use of child soldiers, providing psychosocial support to those affected by conflict, and ensuring that all children have access to education even in the midst of crisis. Investing in the future of these children is not only a moral obligation, but also a smart investment in the long-term peace and stability of the African continent. Section 7. The long road to healing paths towards a brighter future. While the challenges facing Africa may seem insurmountable, there is always hope. The path towards a future free from resource wars is long and arduous, but it is a journey that must be taken. It requires a collective effort involving governments, civil society organizations, regional bodies, and the international community, all working together to address the root causes of conflict and create the conditions for lasting peace. Strengthening governance and promoting the rule of law are essential first steps. This means tackling corruption, promoting transparency and accountability, and ensuring that all citizens have equal access to justice. When people feel that their voices are heard and that their rights are protected, they are less likely to resort to violence to resolve their grievances. Investing in education and economic opportunity is equally crucial. By providing young people with the skills and knowledge they need to succeed, we can help to break the cycle of poverty and violence that often fuels conflict. When people have a stake in the future of their communities, they are more likely to work towards peace and stability. Addressing the legacy of colonialism and promoting inter-ethnic dialogue are also essential components of any lasting solution. Acknowledging past injustices, promoting reconciliation, and fostering a sense of shared identity can help to heal old wounds and build a more inclusive and equitable society. Section 8. A call for justice, breaking the cycle of impunity. Justice and accountability are the cornerstones of any lasting peace. Impunity breeds resentment, fuels further violence, and undermines the rule of law. Holding perpetrators of human rights abuses accountable for their crimes is not about revenge, but about breaking the cycle of violence and deterring future atrocities. It is about sending a clear message that such acts will not be tolerated, and that those who commit them will be held responsible. Establishing transitional justice mechanisms such as truth and reconciliation commissions can play an important role in addressing past injustices and promoting healing. These mechanisms provide a platform for victims to share their stories, for perpetrators to acknowledge their crimes, and for communities to begin the process of reconciliation. International criminal justice mechanisms such as the International Criminal Court also have a role to play in holding perpetrators of the most serious crimes accountable. While the ICC has faced criticism for its focus on Africa, it remains an important tool for ensuring that those who commit genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes do not escape justice. The pursuit of justice must be balanced with a commitment to peace. In some cases, amnesties or other forms of transitional justice may be necessary to end a conflict and create the conditions for lasting peace. However, such measures should never be used to shield those responsible for the most serious crimes from justice. Section 9. A tapestry of hope, weaving a future of peace and shared prosperity. The challenges facing Africa are real and complex, but they are not insurmountable. The continent has the potential to overcome its history of conflict and to build a future of peace, prosperity, and shared progress. Realizing this potential requires a collective effort, one that draws on the strength, resilience, and wisdom of the African people themselves. It is a future where the guns fall silent and the sounds of children laughing and playing fill the air. It is a future where diamonds represent not conflict but hope, where the earth's bounty is shared equitably, and where the rule of law prevails over the law of the gun. It is a future where all Africans, regardless of ethnicity, religion or social status, can live together in peace, dignity and shared prosperity. This is the future that we must strive for, a future worthy of the sacrifices of those who have suffered and died in Africa's conflicts. It is a future that is within our reach if we have the courage, the compassion and the will to make it a reality.